It's my own family story. My mother migrated from Rome, Georgia. My father migrated from Petersburg, Virginia. They met in Washington, D.C., which was one of the magnets for people who were part of this great migration, as was St. Louis and Chicago and Detroit and New York and Los Angeles. And so that's where they met and married. And had they not been part of this great migration, I wouldn't even exist, which is also the story for most African Americans, and in many respects, most Americans, because most of us are descended from people who came from a long ways away, across the Atlantic, across the Rio Grande, across the Pacific, met and created whole new lineages of different kinds of people who never ever would have met if they hadn't done what the people in this book did. The people in this book are in some ways proxies for what someone in all of our backgrounds had to have done for us to be here. It's the greatest underreported story of the 20th century, in my view. It involves the majority of African Americans in this country. The majority of African Americans are descended from this great migration. Those in the North and the West, the Midwest. Those in the South have people who were part of it as well. So it's something that connects people North and South. When we look at 20th century history, when we look at 20th century life in general, from the culture that we often kind of take for granted, from the music, from literature, whole art forms wouldn't even exist had there been no great migration. For example, jazz would not have existed, Motown would not have existed, rhythm and blues, and even rock and roll, which is in some ways descended from the blues itself, which was carried by the people who were part of this great migration. Hip hop, of course. All these people brought Southern culture with them. Their children and their grandchildren transformed it into other art forms, which I've just mentioned. Then when it comes to literature, such people as Toni Morrison and August Wilson and Lorraine Hansberry, the two playwrights I've just mentioned, their work was often inspired by the experiences that they'd had as children of this great migration. All these names that I've given you are people who were descended from the great migration, whose parents made a way for them. They would not even have become the people that they became had there been no great migration. They've often been miscast as people who were poor, uneducated, and came to seek, in some ways, seek public assistance here in the North. And the exact opposite is what really happened. These are people who were hard workers in the land. They were people who were living in a caste system which is almost unbelievable for us today. They're people who were living in a world in which, by virtue of their birth, they were consigned to a particular places that they could go, schools that they could attend. There were so many limits on them. And so when they left like anyone else seeking a better life for themselves and their children. The profile of them would have been someone who had gone as far as they could in school where they were in the South. They were people who often had dreams of making a better life for themselves in the North. And they're also people who were married and remain married. That's one of the big myths about this whole generation, actually 3 generations of people who were part of this. They were more likely to be raising their children in 2-parent households. And they were also more likely, believe it or not, to have had fewer children than were the immigrants who were arriving from other parts of the world.